The National Weather Service in Lantern Bend has issued a localized anomaly warning for the following area. Do not look at the tree line. Secure all reinforced doors and lower your blinds immediately. If you hear a voice you recognize asking for help outside your home, do not open the door. They do not know how to blink. This warning will remain in effect until sunrise.
I poured my coffee down the sink. I figured some bored kid with a ham radio had hacked the local emergency broadcast frequency. It happens more often than people think, especially out here where the repeater towers are running on hardware from the 90s. I reached over and clicked the Midland weather radio off. The silence in the kitchen rushed back in, heavy and thick, broken only by the sound of the rain hammering against the tin roof. I'm not a paranoid guy. I spent years as a park ranger before I started working as a freelance stringer, collecting the kind of local stories people know better than to take to the sheriff. When you spend half your life navigating deep woods in the dark, and the other half interviewing terrified people who swear they saw the impossible, you learn to filter out the noise. You look for contradictions. You look for physical evidence. You don't jump to ghosts just because a frequency gets crossed. So when Lauren and I bought this cabin, sitting on 30 acres of heavy Appalachian timber right outside Lantern Bend, the isolation didn't bother me. It was cheap, it was quiet, and it gave me a secure place to work through the tapes, field logs, and case files I collect without anyone looking over my shoulder. The only real downside was the grid. The power out here is a suggestion, and cell service drops to zero the second the cloud cover gets too low. That's why I bought the radio. Just a standard, cheap emergency radio I picked up at a hardware store for $30, just to know if a severe storm was coming my way in the dark. I'd had it plugged into the wall for 3 months, and it hadn't made a single sound. Until tonight. The storm had rolled in fast around 8 o'clock. Not a tornado, but a massive, ugly squall line. The wind tore through the pines, and the power grid surrendered about 10 minutes later. I didn't care. I lit a kerosene lantern, made a cup of coffee on the camping stove, and sat at the kitchen island, listening to the rain. That's when the radio screamed. If you've never been in a dead quiet house when an emergency alert system tone goes off, it hits your nervous system like a live wire. It's a harsh, digital shrieking, designed to wake you out of a dead sleep. It had kicked over to its internal battery, the red alert light flashing like a strobe in the dark kitchen. Then came the robotic text-to-speech voice, the one telling me not to look at the tree line. Like I said, I turned it off. I chalked it up to a prank. I walked over to the kitchen window. The glass was cold against my hand. I wiped away the condensation and looked out into the yard. It was pitch black outside. The only thing I could see was the faint outline of my detached workshop about 50 yards away, illuminated by the occasional flash of sheet lightning. I stared at the tree line behind it. Nothing. Just pines thrashing in the wind. I let out a breath, feeling a little stupid for letting a hacked radio get under my skin. Behind me, in the dark kitchen, the radio clicked back on.
Warning. Non-compliance detected.
I froze.
The subject is currently observing the tree line. Step away from the glass. It can see your silhouette.
I didn't breathe. I didn't move. The radio was sitting exactly where I left it. The dial was still clicked over to the off position. Another flash of lightning lit up the yard. It wasn't just pines thrashing in the wind. Something tall, with limbs that hung down past its knees, was standing at the edge of the woods. And it was staring directly at my kitchen window. I didn't scream. When you spend enough time in the dark, your brain learns to process threats before your body has time to panic. I took one slow step backward. The heel of my boot didn't make a sound against the wood floor. I took another step. The shape at the edge of the woods didn't move. It was standing perfectly still in the freezing rain, its head tilted at an angle that looked broken. The lightning flashed again. In that fraction of a second, I saw that it wasn't just standing there. It was leaning forward, like a runner waiting for the starting gun. The radio hissed from the kitchen island, breaking the dead air.
The subject has broken line of sight. This is a temporary measure. Secure the perimeter. It will test the perimeter.
I didn't wait to see if it was giving me advice or giving me a countdown. I turned my back to the window, walked straight to the hall closet, and pulled out my 12 gauge. I rack-shucked a shell into the chamber. The heavy, metallic clack echoed in the quiet house. It was the best sound in the world right then. It meant I wasn't helpless. I grabbed a box of shells, shoved them into my jacket pocket, and started moving through the cabin. The property is an old A-frame, sitting about 20 miles outside of Lantern Bend. It's deep in the Appalachian brush, the kind of place where the trees grow so thick you can't see your closest neighbor even in the dead of winter. I bought it because I liked the privacy. Tonight, the privacy felt like a trap. I went from room to room. I locked the front door. I deadbolted the mudroom. I pulled the heavy blackout curtains closed over every window on the ground floor. I didn't look outside again. If the thing on the radio told me it could see my silhouette, I was going to believe it. I made it back to the kitchen and set the shotgun on the island, right next to the Midland radio. I stared at the plastic casing. It was completely dark. The power switch was still clicked to the far left. I picked it up. I popped the battery compartment on the back and dumped the AA batteries into my hand. The radio was dead. No wall power, no battery backup. I set it back down on the island. 5 seconds later, the red alert light flared to life. It was blinding in the dark kitchen. A harsh, pulsing strobe. Then the digital static swelled, filling the room like a swarm of hornets.
Update. It is no longer at the tree line.
I picked up the shotgun. My hands were sweating against the cold steel of the barrel.
It has crossed the yard. It is currently standing on the front porch.
I aimed the barrel at the hallway leading to the front door.
Do not approach the door. Do not look through the peephole.
The wind outside died down. The rain turned into a slow, heavy drizzle. In the sudden quiet, I heard it. Heavy, wet footsteps on the wooden planks of my front porch. They didn't sound like boots. They sounded soft, like bare feet slapping against the wet wood. Slap. Pause. Slap. It was pacing back and forth in front of my door. I held my breath. I didn't want to make a sound. I didn't want it to know exactly where I was standing. The footsteps stopped right in front of the door. There was a long, agonizing silence. Then, the brass doorknob started to turn. Slowly. Deliberately. The deadbolt held. The knob clicked back into place. I exhaled a shaky breath, keeping the gun leveled. A voice came from the other side of the door.
Hey! Hello? Is anyone in there?
My blood ran cold. It was a woman's voice. She sounded terrified, shivering.
Please! My car broke down on the dirt road. My phone is dead. Please, it's freezing out here.
I took a step toward the hallway. Every instinct I had, every shred of decency built into a person, screamed at me to open that door. It was freezing. She was stranded in the Appalachian woods outside of Lantern Bend, in the middle of a storm. I lowered the barrel of the shotgun. The radio hissed violently.
Warning. Do not answer the door. The voice you hear is a mimic. It is using distress to bait the subject.
I stopped dead in my tracks.
Hello? I can hear you moving in there. Please, I think something is out here in the woods with me. Please open the door.
She sounded so real. Her voice was cracking with panic. I gripped the shotgun tighter. I didn't say a word.
Please, I'm so cold. I just need to use your phone.
I stood there for what felt like an hour, listening to her beg. But then, I noticed something wrong. It wasn't just what she was saying, it was how she was saying it. The cadence was too perfect.
Please, my car broke down on the dirt road. My phone is dead. Please, it's freezing out here.
It was the exact same phrasing, the exact same inflection.
Hello? I can hear you moving in there. Please, I think something is out here in the woods with me. Please open the door.
She wasn't just repeating herself. She was looping. Like a scratch CD playing the exact same track of audio over and over again. Perfectly identical every single time. I backed away from the hallway. The knocking started. It wasn't a frantic, desperate pounding of a stranded driver. It was a heavy, rhythmic thud. 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 It was hitting the solid wood of my front door hard enough to rattle the frame. The radio clicked.
It knows you are awake. It is testing the structural integrity of the primary entrance. Relocate to an interior room. Lock the door. Do not make a sound.
I didn't need to be told twice. I kept the Mossberg trained on the heavy wood of the front door and backed up, step by step, until I cleared the hallway. I retreated into the center of the cabin, pressing my spine against the stone masonry of the fireplace. The thudding against the door didn't stop. It was relentless, rhythmic. Thud. 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 It felt like the whole house was vibrating. And then, just like the looping tape of the terrified woman, the knocking stopped instantly. It didn't slow down. It just ceased. For a long minute, the only sound was the rain hitting the tin roof and the steady ticking of the battery-powered wall clock. Then, the footsteps started again. Slap. Pause. Slap. Moving away from the front door. Moving down the length of the porch toward the side of the house, toward the living room windows. The radio hissed, the static slicing through the dark.
The entity has abandoned the primary entrance. It is seeking a visual vulnerability. Lower your profile immediately. Do not elevate your head above 36 inches.
I dropped to my knees on the hardwood floor. My knees cracked, loudly. But I didn't care. 36 inches. That is exactly the height of the windowsills in this cabin. I crab-walked backward, keeping the heavy Mossberg leveled toward the eastern wall, until my back hit the kitchen island. I pulled my knees to my chest. If I stayed sitting on the floor, I was below the sill line. It couldn't see me from the yard, but I couldn't see it either. The heavy slapping footsteps moved off the wooden porch and down into the muddy gravel of the driveway. The sound was squelchy. Heavy. Whatever this thing was, it weighed a lot more than a man. I listened as the footsteps tracked slowly along the side of the house. They stopped outside the first living room window. The heavy blackout curtains were drawn shut. I had pulled them myself 20 minutes ago. I knew there wasn't a gap. But then I heard the scratching. A long, slow drag of something hard against the exterior glass. It sounded like a dull utility knife being pulled down the pane. It was looking for a seam in the curtains. I squeezed the grip of the shotgun so hard my knuckles went numb. I had buckshot loaded. At this range, it would blow the window and whatever was standing behind it into the driveway. But if I missed, or if buckshot wasn't enough to stop it, I'd just open the house. The scratching stopped. The footsteps moved to the next window, the one directly across from the kitchen island. The radio flared again. The red light washed over the kitchen cabinets, and for a second, I was terrified the light would bleed through the curtains and give me away.
It is testing the glass. Do not look at the window. If it catches the reflection of your eyes, it will breach.
I snapped my eyes shut. I pressed the side of my face against the cold wood of the kitchen cabinets. I heard a heavy thump against the window pane. The glass rattled in the frame. The sheer force of it vibrated through the floorboards and up into my boots. It was pressing its weight against the glass. I kept my eyes clamped shut, visualizing the layout of the cabin. I've repaired every inch of these walls. I know every stud, every weak point. The living room windows are old, single-pane glass from the 70s. They wouldn't hold up to a heavy branch in a storm, let alone something actively trying to break in. Thump. The wood frame groaned. I reached into my hoodie pocket with my free hand, my fingers brushing against the spare shotgun shells, and my thumb hit something else. My phone. I pulled it out. I opened my eyes, keeping my head completely tucked down behind the island. I booted the camera app and switched it to the front-facing selfie lens. Using the screen as a mirror, I slowly angled the phone up past the edge of the counter, pointing it toward the window. The heavy blackout curtains were still closed, but right in the center, where the two fabric panels meet, there was a gap, no wider than a pencil. Pressed against that tiny slit of glass on the outside was an eye. It wasn't human. It was massive, completely pale, without a pupil, and it was darting back and forth with a frantic, twitching mechanical speed. It was scanning the room. I lowered the phone instantly. The radio let out a burst of static that sounded almost like a sigh.
It did not see you. The visual sweep is complete. It is moving to the crawlspace vents.
Crawlspace vents. This house was built on a raised foundation. There's an 18-inch gap between the frozen mud and the subfloor, vented along the perimeter with cheap, stamped aluminum grates. They were secured with 4 brittle masonry screws each. I knew, because I was the one who installed them. They wouldn't keep out a determined raccoon, let alone whatever was outside. I stayed perfectly still, my back pressed against the kitchen island. I listened to the rain. I listened to the wind. And then, I heard the aluminum grate on the north wall buckle and snap. It sounded like a soda can being crushed in a hydraulic press. A second later, the heavy, wet slapping sound returned. But it wasn't on the porch anymore. It was muffled. Hollow. Slap. Drag. Slap. Drag. It was pulling itself through the dirt directly beneath the living room floor. The radio hissed from the countertop above my head. The red light cast a halo on the ceiling.
The entity is in the substructure. It is tracking your heart rate through the acoustic vibrations in the wood. Do not remain in contact with the floorboards.
I looked down at my boots. Every microscopic tremor in my muscles, every beat of my heart, was drumming straight into the hardwood and echoing down into the crawl space. I had to get off the ground. The kitchen island was solid butcher block, bolted directly to the joists. I slung the Mossberg across my back, the heavy barrel biting into my shoulder blade. I reached up and grabbed the edge of the countertop with both hands. I pulled myself up. I didn't use my feet. I didn't push off the floor. I just used pure upper body tension to haul my weight upward, sliding onto the cold wood top like a guy pulling himself out of a frozen lake. I rolled onto my back. I didn't make a sound. 2 seconds later, the floorboards right where I had been sitting groaned violently. It wasn't pacing anymore. It was pressing upward. The wood bowed. A galvanized finishing nail popped out of the plank with a sharp, violent ping, ricocheting off the refrigerator. Whatever was down there was directly underneath the kitchen, directly underneath the island I was lying on. Then, the breathing started. It wasn't coming through the floorboards. It was coming from the forced air HVAC register set into the floor, just 3 feet from where I was laying. Wet, ragged, like ruined lungs trying to pull air through a collapsed pipe. It didn't try to mimic a human voice this time. Instead, a sound came up through the metal vent. It was the heavy, metallic sound of a pump-action shotgun chambering a shell, perfectly identical to the sound I had made in the bedroom 20 minutes ago. It hadn't just been outside. It had been listening the entire time. My thumb moved to the safety of the Mossberg. I didn't click it off. It would make a sound, and I wasn't going to give it another piece of audio to play with. The radio's static hummed. It didn't use the loud alert tone this time. It dropped its artificial volume to a harsh whisper.
Warning. The structural integrity of the subfloor is compromised. It is testing the ventilation shaft. It can smell the carbon dioxide leaving your lungs. Do not exhale.
I clamped my jaw shut. I held my breath. I stared straight up at the dark ceiling, my lungs burning, listening to the wet, ragged breathing coming from the metal vent down on the floor. I heard the thin metal slats of the HVAC register begin to bend. A high-pitched squeal of aluminum giving way under immense, localized pressure. Something was trying to push its way up through the ductwork. My chest screamed for oxygen. My vision started to swim with black spots. The metal slats snapped, one by one. Pop, pop, pop. The radio whispered again.
Hold.
I gripped the shotgun. I could hear the wet skin of the thing dragging against the galvanized steel of the air duct. It was inches away from the kitchen air.
Hold.
My vision narrowed to a pinprick. I was going to pass out. If I passed out, I would gasp. If I gasped, it would find me. The dragging stopped. A pale, elongated finger, longer than a kitchen knife, with too many joints, hooked itself slowly over the edge of the broken floor vent. The finger tapped the hardwood floor. The nail was thick, yellowed, and sharp enough to gouge the varnish. It wasn't feeling around blindly. It was drumming, patiently. My lungs were burning so hot I thought my chest was going to crack open. My vision was tunneling, fading into a mess of gray static at the edges. It knew I was close. It just needed me to prove it. The finger hooked over the edge of the shattered register and slowly, agonizingly slowly, reached out and touched the vertical wood paneling of the kitchen island, exactly 4 inches below where my head was resting. I could hear the wet, ragged breathing coming up through the ductwork, so loud it vibrated through the butcher block beneath me. Then the breathing stopped. A voice came up through the vent. My blood turned cold. It wasn't the terrified woman from the porch. It wasn't a glitching radio broadcast. It was me. It was the exact, strained grunt I had made 3 minutes earlier when I pulled my body weight up onto the island. It played it back again. Identical pitch. Identical strain. It was taunting me. Waiting for me to break. My mouth parted involuntarily. My body was overriding my brain. I was going to gasp. I couldn't stop it. The radio hissed. It didn't use the red alert light. It just hummed with a low, flat static.
The anomaly warning expires in 10 seconds.
The pale finger resting against the island twitched.
9, 8.
I bit down on my own tongue, hard enough to taste copper. The pain gave me a 3-second surge of clarity.
7, 6.
The thing in the vent began to push upward. I could hear the galvanized steel buckling under the weight of its shoulders. It was coming up.
5, 4.
The heavy blackout curtains on the east-facing window suddenly glowed. It wasn't lightning. It was the dull, heavy gray of morning twilight breaking over the Appalachian tree line.
The sun has breached the horizon. The localized anomaly warning is now lifted.
The pale finger snapped back down into the ductwork like a whip. I heard a violent, frantic scrambling sound. Metal tearing. Dirt shifting. Slap, drag, slap, drag. The heavy squelching sounds tore through the crawl space, moving away from the kitchen, away from the foundation, and fading rapidly into the tree line. I couldn't hold it anymore. I gasped. I pulled in a massive, ragged breath of air, choking and coughing on the dust that had settled over the island. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my heart hammering against my ribs like a jackhammer. I didn't move for 2 hours, not until the heavy gray light of morning was burning straight through the gap in the curtains, illuminating the kitchen in harsh, undeniable reality. I finally sat up. My muscles were cramped and screaming. I slid off the island, keeping the shotgun leveled just in case. My boots hit the floorboards with a heavy thud. The house was empty. I looked down at the HVAC register. It was completely destroyed. The metal slats were bent upward and sheared off. The ductwork below it was crushed, coated in a thick, foul-smelling black mud that smelled like ozone and rotting leaves. I walked over to the kitchen sink. The broken glass from my water cup was still sitting in the stainless steel basin. The Midland weather radio was exactly where I left it. The red light was dead. The screen was blank. The 3 AA batteries were still sitting in a neat little pile on the countertop next to it. I stared at it for a long time. I'm a stringer. I collect stories. I look for the truth behind the panic. But you can't reason with something that doesn't follow the rules of reality. You can only survive it. I reached out and picked up the empty plastic shell, planning to walk it out to the burn barrel and turn it into toxic black smoke. As my fingers brushed the casing, the speaker gave one short, sharp click of static. The red light didn't turn on. The screen stayed dead. But the flat, robotic voice drifted out of the plastic grill one last time.
Update. The entity has vacated the perimeter. It has relocated to the attic. Do not look up.
If you made it all the way to the end, drop "Don't Look Up" in the comments so I know you survived the night. And also, tell me what you'd do if an emergency radio started giving you hyper-specific instructions to survive something outside your house. Do you follow the rules of a machine you know is broken? Or do you trust your own instincts and take your chances in the dark? What's your breaking point before you realize the broadcast isn't a glitch? If you want more stories from Lantern Bend in the deep woods, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next warning. All right, I'll see you next time.